book lovers. Welcome to another edition of Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensle-Lowrance, and I'm your host for today's session. I am so excited for today's conversation. As you know, on Authors Love Bookstores, the way this works is we invite an author and we ask him or her to suggest a bookstore that they'd like to profile in our series. And so today's author is Rebecca Makkai, her books are fantastic, and I'm so excited she's here. And at her request, we've invited Javier Ramirez from Madison Street Books in Chicago. And let's get started with some introductions. So first, Rebecca Makkai. Rebecca is the Chicago-based author of the novels The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, and The Borrower, as well as a short story collection, Music for Wartime. Let me tell you about The Great Believers. This is the kind of book that I describe as the one more chapter book. You know, you sit down, you're like, I got a half hour before dinner, I'll read this book, or a half hour before bed. But then the half hour becomes 45 minutes and becomes an hour. And then suddenly it's 3 a.m. and all you've been doing is reading this book because you cannot put it down. It's so good. So that's The Great Believers. It's true. And I'm not the only one who thinks this, obviously. The Great Believers was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award. Rebecca received the LA Times Book Prize for this novel, as well as the American Library Association's Carnegie Medal, as well as many other honors. It's, again, terrific. You've got to read it if you haven't already. Rebecca is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University, and she is the artistic director of Story Studio Chicago. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And let me introduce Javier Ramirez. Javier is a longtime Chicago indie bookseller. He's the co-owner of Madison Street Books. He's a member of the American Bookseller Association's ABC Advisory Council. He recently served on the ABA's middle grade YA debut Indies Introduced panel, and he was a 2017 Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction Judge. He also co-hosts an event series in Chicago called Publishing Cocktails. It's a semi-annual event that brings together independent bookstores and authors, and we're very excited to have you as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.
Now, let's get started by introducing people to your bookstore. So you're actually in the bookstore right now, so we can hear behind you and see you have customers. You're open.
Yes, we are open. We opened 2 days before the in-shelter was put in place for a grand opening. We're open for 2 days, and then we had to close for 4 months. But we've been, the country really has been very supportive. West Loop is it's the best place to open a bookstore in any city, as far as I'm concerned. It's lots of families with kids, really good readers, and we're so happy to have this bookstore here. Rebecca can attest to this. There isn't much down in the West Loop, in the downtown area, which used to be just a plethora of incredible independent bookstores 10, 15 years ago. But we're here, Madison Street Books. As you can see, Wayne is working down there, helping customers. We're a small store, 1,200 square feet. We are general, and we are in the process of selling. We're going to sell some vinyl. I think that was a question later. I should have kept that.
Oh.
But we're happy to be here. So
for our viewers, just to get a real understanding, you opened, and then 2 days later, your grand opening, and then 2 days later you had to close because of COVID.
Yes.
That obviously wasn't in your business plan.
No, I would not suggest that to anybody opening.
What did that do to your bookstore? How did you adapt to stay alive during this time period? How did you pivot?
I think that every bookstore could attest to this. We really had to rethink our business plan and on the fly, and we basically became, and not in a bad way, we became a processing center. We cleared off there's a really nice big nonfiction table back there. We cleared it off and it became our shipping area. So we basically had to just readjust, and it was frustrating to have I don't know if you can see the windows, our POS or our checkout station is right by the window. And it was frustrating to see people walk by, look at what we had in the windows, and not be able to come into the store for 4 months. We actually took a few orders, people right outside the window, going to our website, ordering the book, and I can see them ordering the book. And then me putting it in a bag, leaving it outside the door. so they could
Wow.
pick it up and go.
Wow.
So it was, I just can't say enough about West Loop. And oddly enough, there's some silver linings. I mean, we about 30% of our sales, online sales, were from out of the state of Illinois. They were all over the country. And I think that there were a few stories written up about us, and people reacted. There were a lot of people that were native to Chicago and moved away, and they still subscribe to the Sun Times or the what's the other newspaper here? What's it called?
The Tribune?
Tribune, yes.
It's been a long week, man.
I know it has. And they subscribed online, and so they read the stories and they ordered books from us, and just people discovering us. And that, I don't think that would have happened had we opened traditionally. And it's nice to have people thinking about us outside of, and a lot of bookstore, a lot of indie bookstores supported us and we supported them, buying t-shirts, buying books, trying to keep each other in business. And we're a really tight-knit group, but it really just did bring us together. So yeah.
What you have to understand about Javier too is that even before the store opened, he had garnered so much goodwill just in that neighborhood from people who, like, he put on all these events. We were in there, like, the store was just empty, but a bunch of us in there at the holidays signing books, so people knew about it. And then he's also, Javier's worked for, so Chicago is spoiled for indie bookstores compared to other cities, and Javier has worked for 90% of them.
Yes.
And in a good way, not like he lasts 2 days or something. Like he's made his mark on all these amazing bookstores. And so authors and other literary types around Chicago know him and trust him and will go anywhere for him and do whatever. So he's barely opening up this new place. It's a couple of card tables, the doors are open, it's freezing, and it's the holidays, and he's like, come in and sign. Everyone's like, yeah, okay. And it brings the community in. And so by the time you guys opened, it's this cult of Javier going on, as always. And so it works.
Thank you, that's very nice. Yes, we did leading up, last fall, we signed the lease, and through the fall and winter, we did the holiday pop-up, but we also hosted a couple of book launches, some rep nights, a couple of birthday parties, just to let people know that we were here. And we just wanted to go into the opening rolling along. And we hosted Kylie Reed when there was nothing in the space. And we were lucky to get that event with Claire Lombardo. And we had 100 people in this space with nothing. We had fold out chairs, and the capacity is, I think, 56 or something. So we broke a few rules.
What made you want to open your own bookstore? If you've had this, sounds like you've had this long career of supporting, playing a role in other bookstores in Chicago. What made you want to open the door to your own shop?
It's ever since I really got the page turned for me, 25 years ago, I've wanted to do this. It's been a lifelong thing. I wasn't a big reader growing up, and so when I was 22, I was pulled by the ear by people who knew better than me and said, "This is what you should read," and it just took off from there. It the light went off in my head, and I moved here from Sacramento to open a book for Tower Records, to open a Tower store in Schaumburg, Illinois, and 25 years ago, and opened the book section there. And it's just been, I knew very little about Chicago, and it was so fun to become part of that, moving into the city and becoming part of that, a really tight-knit group. Rebecca's right. There are just a wealth of independent bookstores in Chicago, and some have closed. A lot are still open, but we're still.
And lots of new ones have opened. I mean, there's so many. If you look at just what's opened in the past 5 or 10 years, there are a bunch of new ones that are doing well, that are finding their space.
Exactly. We all share it. Yeah.
Yeah, and Chicago's neighborhoody enough that a bookstore that blocks away from another bookstore is not even. It's not cannibalism, really. People want their event spaces.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I go to I go to other stores' events, like one particular bookstore, Women and Children First, has an incredible event schedule, and everyone envies it. And I go to as many events as I can there. We share secrets, and we talk about stuff, and we're, like I said, we're a really sort of tight-knit group.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just agreeing. And it was just the Chicago literary community in terms of writers
Yes.
is really tight knit too, and actually does stuff. We like turn out for each other's events. There are parties. We know each other. We like each other, and it's big enough that there's plenty going on, but it's not like New York or LA where anyone at that party can actually help you get published. So there's no one to kiss up to. So there's no hierarchy. So it's really egalitarian, and it's really lovely. And, just all, not everybody is an extrovert. Not everybody's out there doing stuff, but I think it's the absolute best city in America in which to be a writer. I think Boston and Minneapolis are up there too, in terms of like community and indies and stuff, but I think there's nothing better than Chicago right now.
Yeah, and Rebecca she is our savior. She does so much for bookstores, every single one of us. A lot of writers do, but she goes, I don't know how she's still sitting here and not like lying down somewhere on her vacation, because she does so much.
Right here.
Yeah.
We already have a viewer question for you both. So one of our viewers asks, can you recommend a long absorbing book to read in quarantine? The viewer goes on to say, I just finished Free Food for Millionaires by Min Jin Lee, and the person has also read Pachinko, and I am craving something that I can sink into for a few days. And that actually leads into my question, which is our viewers always want to know what books you recommend during this time. So what have you been reading where you found solace, or was a good distraction? Anything that you can recommend to our viewers today?
Rebecca?
Well, yeah. So Javier, you just mentioned Claire Lombardo. And that's someone I know we both adore. She was actually, I take no credit for her success. She was my student when I taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she was already clearly brilliant. But the most fun we ever had is this long, kind of really gripping, but it rolls along, just, it's both light and serious family novel. And it's a nice big, it's a big doorstop, but it doesn't feel like you're bogged down. Okay. I would recommend that one. And it's on my mind since you just mentioned it, but I would recommend it anyway.
It's pretty great. Yeah. And she gets all the Chicago stuff right, and the Oak Park stuff right on. I love when a writer can do that. So like Rebecca.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and she grew up in Oak Park, which she's been writing about with great authority.
What do you see, Javier, that your customers are buying during this?
Unfortunately, with the current events, and we've sold, I should just put this, we've sold a lot. Every bookstore has sold a ton of social justice issues books, which is great. People are reading up on it. That's got to be we've sold big, 40 copies of a certain title. That's big for us. Yeah. But aside from that, people, they want their normal people. They want, because of the Netflix shows, I think it's Netflix, or maybe it's Hulu, Sally Rooney, Normal People. Oh. That's got to be one of our biggest sellers, just in terms of weekly. The Eric Larson book is a big, The Splendid and the Vile is a big seller for us. It was big during Father's Day. So those are two pretty big titles for us, and smattering of other books, which I love. And I love when we sell one title, but we can sell, 3s and 4s of 25 different titles. I think it's really good for the store.
So obviously you can't have in-person events during this time, but you are doing some virtual events. So can you explain to the viewers some of the things that you're doing at the store? Yes,
yeah. So we have a standing every except for this tomorrow night, but every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central, we have what we call Mad Street Mixers, and it's a blend of just book people talking about books. We have authors, we have booksellers, we have publishers, we have editors. We had just 2 weeks ago, we had a small press night in which we had the editors from Tin House, from Biblioasis up in Canada, $2 Radio, and Cursor, a small publisher out of Minneapolis. My friend Emily Cook, she represents them and sells their books. They're translated works. but we just sort of mix it up. We don't. It's not something that is rigid. And we had a horror panel 3 weeks ago, and we have held a few. It was incredible. It's just some of my favorite writers were on there. And we've also had a few events that are not part of the Mad Street Mixers, but we've had Lily King, we've had Chelsea Beaker, and Rufy Thorpe, and we've had just some great conversations with those authors. Yeah, so we're just trying to keep, at least two a week, just to keep our viewers and keep our audience involved. So.
And do you have a newsletter if someone wants to go to your website and sign up?
Oh yes, yeah, madstreetbooks.com.
Great.
It's easy to do. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Rebecca, we're getting questions for you. We're getting writing questions. So we seem to have, of course, we're getting writing questions. So we, because our viewers tend to be a mix of writers and book lovers, and sometimes both. And so we're getting a couple for you. So let's see. And this is a good question. I'm having trouble writing without coffee shops. I like the occasional change in scenery, and being at home 24/7 is really killing it for me. What tips might you offer?
Yeah, I'm having that issue too. So I'm in Vermont right now because we live here in June and July, and I finally.
Ooh, we just lost you. The sound. Yes, you're muted, Rebecca. Okay, so while Rebecca's...
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Moving closer to the router would help, but I don't know what's going on. So yeah, I was borrowing a neighbor's sort of outdoor shack to write in this last weekend, and that was good.
Nice.
So maybe if you have a friend who's been distancing too, you can trade offices with them. Maybe that's something.
Wow.
You don't have your own stuff around. I don't know. It's all that's all that's working for me right now, because I really miss the coffee shop thing too.
So are you able to write during this quarantine? Have you found that you can do it? Yes.
Have to. I need to be getting the next book done. And it's hard. It's hard, I think, for anyone who has kids. Summer is the opposite of summer because kids are home instead of at school. And then they've been out of school for longer than usual. And I want to spend time with them when they're around. I don't want to work. I want to play with them. So, and now I have one coming into the room and talking because I came inside. So let me see. I'm gonna try. So it didn't seem, moving closer to the router didn't seem to help anyway. So I'm just gonna go back out and see what happens.
So while you're walking, we'll ask you another one of the questions that came in. So this is someone who is just finished their manuscript, doesn't have an MFA, doesn't have a network of in the literary field, not quite ready for an agent yet, but needs to get feedback on the manuscript. And we don't know what city the person's in, because obviously we could direct them to some communities if we knew where they're based. So just generally, a first-time writer working on a manuscript, what might be a good way for them to connect with other people and get some feedback? And she's frozen. Okay. That's okay. So let's go back to when Rebecca comes back, she can answer that question. This is what happens when you're on the internet.
Exactly, yeah.
Anything can happen.
Exactly.
Anything can happen. So Javier, what have you learned from this experience during COVID-19? Have there been any lessons from this experience that you'll use to change the way you do business going forward?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that. I wouldn't say any lessons. I think, well, speaking of this, like the internet, virtual events, I would have, if you told me a year ago we would have been doing a virtual events, I would have told you to leave very quickly. But the importance of that, and the importance of, especially at least now with COVID, social media has been a huge thing for every bookstore. I mean, just staying in touch with people. But as far as the just learning how to, that was a dog. Just learning how to be a processing center was kind of weird. That was, yeah. But now you're back.
Now you're back, Rebecca.
Maybe.
We like dogs on Authors Love Bookstores. It's okay. Dogs are good. So one of the things, so earlier today we were speaking with Toby Cox.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, now we can.
Hear me?
Now we can. We can see you.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, let's
All
try
right.
this.
Let's try this.
There were so many things that just happened. I switched to my phone, but my phone was still hooked up to the shower speaker. So everyone's voice started coming out of the shower. So now I have to go get my, I got my earphones, my earbuds. So let's try again.
All right.
That is awesome.
That was an amazing adventure.
It really was.
Oh, man.
Thanks for
Rebecca,
taking us along.
you win the award for persistence.
Yeah, seriously.
We appreciate it. Okay. So let's go back and ask the question. So we had
this person, yeah.
New writer, has a manuscript, doesn't necessarily have a literary community. What might be some suggestions or tips that you would offer him or her?
Yeah, I would say that there are, you mentioned my main teaching gig when you introduced me, which is Story Studio Chicago. Depending where people live, there's also Grub Street in Boston, there's Lighthouse in Denver, there's Hugo House in Seattle. There are these amazing nonprofit writing centers around the country where you could online or in person get a manuscript consultation, take a reviewing and revising class, take a novel writing class, or go to a conference where they're bringing in agents. Muse has a great one. We do one here in Chicago in October, and we're taking it online, of course, this fall. So there are these places, and I don't have an MFA. You don't need an MFA. No one in the publishing world will ever care if you have an MFA. I have never been asked by anyone in publishing if I have a Master's of Fine Arts degree. But it's nice to have connections, and you can find those other places. You can find those online, and you can find those. I would say also, if you live in a city place with a good bookstore, just going to readings in the genre that you are writing in and meeting other audience members, meeting those writers. Eventually you get asked out for drinks afterwards with a bunch of people, and you get to know people that way.
Excellent. So that's a nice segue to my next question, which is, Javier, this morning we talked with Toby Cox from 3 Lives and Company in New York City, and that bookstore is 40 years old. And we asked, not that Toby's been there for 40 years, but he's been there for about 20 something. And we asked him, what advice would he have for a newer bookseller? And I'm going to paraphrase him, but he talked about the importance of staff, of the bookstore staff, and how they're your best advocates, and they're the ones who help your customers find books, fall in love with your store. Can you tell us a little bit about your team at your bookstore? Do they love books as much as you? What value do they bring to the store that makes it special?
Yeah, it's important. I've worked with a lot of staffs over the years, and some good, some bad. But I think that really, when you hire people and they say they love books, it's a different sort of love when you work in a bookstore. I mean, people come in and say, "Oh, I'd love to work in a bookstore. You guys get to read all the time," which we don't. I mean, we read a lot, but we don't read all the time. And I think people have the idea of a bookstore being like when you've got mail. You're sitting at the counter and you're drinking your tea, and the bell rings above the door, and then you have that book right under the counter for that customer. It's not that at all. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of reading, and when you can, but you just have to find your, like, where you have to talk a lot. That's one thing that you can't be shy about talking about your favorite books. You have to write about your favorite books. And you really have to put yourself out there. I went through a lot as a young bookseller. It's really embarrassing myself. And you have to do that. Like I worked at a bookstore just at the Sears Tower, not far from here, in the first lower level of the Sears Tower. And it was a great little bookstore. And I worked with this customer for a long time. She was a lawyer upstairs. And she, one day we went out for drinks, and she said, you recommended a book to me once, and it was The End of Alice. And I was grieving over something at that point, and I didn't really want to read it, but you were so excited about it that it was basically a pity buy. She read it later and really loved it. But, and it was nice of her to tell me that, because it gave me, a little, I had to take something back from it. So yeah,
I
you
love
just,
it.
I mean, as a bookseller, you have to talk to people. It's the only way. That's our connection, whether it's just a hello when they walk in the store, because they'll always come back. You know, if you say do you want some help, and they say no, and just knowing that you're there, they're going to come back 5 minutes later and say,
Yeah.
I do have a question for you. But you have to put yourself out there.
I've tried doing this because once in a while they'll do like an Authors in the Indies day. I think
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So I know she's going to talk about the having authors come in and hand sell,
Oh,
which is a really good idea.
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
curious.
sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I was just saying how hard it is. Like I would try to, I'd recommend a book and then they'd like walk across the store and suddenly put it down. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Where,
There's a lot of that going
Javier,
on.
one of Javier's great talents, and I have no other great booksellers, but he's particularly good at this, is you'll go in and you'll be talking to him and somehow you'll end up with like 6 books in your arm and you don't really know how they got there. And then you're like very happily buying them and going, what happened? I just came in to say hello. And then they turned out all to be amazing. But it's just this magical kind of osmosis process. Where when I have tried to do that, helping out, like, oh my God, they want nothing to do with me.
And it's a lot of it is listening, just listening to what people read and what their interests are. Because a lot, I've seen some booksellers just want to talk about what they like, and they'll walk. And once again, I think there's some pity buys going on where they just want to get out of the store and they buy whatever's put in their hands. And so,
yeah.
But if it's a pity buy that they end up falling in love with,
that'd be great for sure.
There's a silver lining, maybe. I mean, that's sort of how you discover new authors, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And new books, by having an open mind.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. We're nearing the end of our time together. Rebecca, is there anything you wanted to ask Javier about the store? Anything you want our viewers to know?
I have a question for him that has nothing to do with that.
Sure.
Okay. So, although we can't talk about it in detail, I am a National Book Award judge this year for fiction.
Yay.
Javier was a National Book Award judge for fiction last year.
Oh.
And we've talked about this before, but we talked about it before I was really into the reading pile and before I was really into the process. And I want some advice. Like, what do you know now about judging like this many amazing books that you have learned?
I was thinking about this morning. You have an incredible panel of judges that you're working with. I worked with my heroes last year. It was the most incredible experience. And I think that Rebecca had something for me to do with me being on the panel, but we'll talk about that later. I think you put a good word in. But when I got over the fact that I was working with my heroes, and I told them the first meeting that, I gushed over them and said, that's all I'm going to do. This won't come up again for the rest of the process. I learned a lot from how they read.
Yeah.
I read differently based on our conversations. Like I listened a lot, and I'm a slow reader and they were all fast readers. So I was playing catch up a lot. But I would say just listen to how they talk about books and how they read books. And I saw books in an entirely different way. The ones we were reading.
Ah, that's cool.
It was incredible. I thought about it afterwards, and it'll be the same thing with you. It's like the Fellowship of the Ring. You'll be friends forever. Like we still email each other and say how much we miss each other, and they do this for the store, and it's incredible. And I would never do it again.
Right. It's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
How many books do you have to read? Or
no, it's not. I think what I can say is that they, in the initial read, you kind of split up the pile a bit. You're not all 5 trying to read every single eligible book. So, I think right now I've got about 150 to read. But you stop reading as soon as you realize that this isn't it.
Yeah.
If I'm not loving it, or if it's really, really fun, but it's not a National Book Award book or whatever it is, I can put it aside. I'm under no obligation to finish something when it's not seriously in contention for me.
Yeah.
And then once we have our big pile of all of us putting in the books that we think, then you're definitely obliged to read the books that other people are recommending. But this initial stage, it's like, there are times when it's just clearly not going to be the book, and you can, you know. And then there are so many times when that's a really small percentage of them where you're like, oh no, this is not. Most of them, it's like, I don't know, this could be amazing. Let me get, who knows? Who am I to say? And then you get all the way through, and I don't know. I have this big color coded system in my spreadsheet right now of like, oh my God, what I'm reading, what I'm recusing myself from, because this is a really ethical process.
Yeah, that's true.
And writers that I know well, I absolutely can't be the first one to read their book. So there's this whole system going on of trading books with other people, and people are really conscientious about it.
They are.
So yeah.
And you're reading a lot digitally.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, a lot of them are coming to us digitally because of the COVID stuff. Not my favorite way to read.
Yeah, same here.
So I'm listening to a bunch on audio, which I do really like. That's why my phone speaker was hooked up to the shower. I was listening in the shower earlier. I started a new book in the shower. It seems pretty good so far. Might not be the way that people imagine their books being like read and judged by like
in the shower. That's hilarious.
Yeah, right.
But don't you think that's what writers need to think about now, is that people read your books in lots of different ways?
I think it's
for
true.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm judging the Carnegie this year. And it's a totally different process. It's
really?
We nominate and then we read, and as opposed to like being told what to read by the National Book Award and by the Kirkus. And it's half and half. We're getting half physical and half digital. But I'm like you, I just digital. It's hard for me.
Yeah. I'm able to dissociate. I'm able to go, okay, like my frustrations with this device have nothing to do with this book. And if a book is good, it overcomes whatever medium, it's not going to ruin a great book for me. It's not going to do that. And a book is still a book. It's a little, I'm always telling my writing students that you're writing for your best readers on an off day. Like you can't expect, like readers are smart, right? But you can't expect that a reader is going to be sitting there with no distractions with your book in a physical copy and like rereading the part that was confusing. Because actual readers read when they're jogging or when they have a baby on their shoulder or when they're in the shower and like
they will now.
Whatever, and things are going on, and that's realistic. You got to think about that. You can't mention a character on page 10 and then bring them up again on page 540 and expect us to remember who they are.
That's true. Yeah. Rebecca, I think you're going to be approached by some shower speaker company. As a spokesperson.
As long as there's no photo shoot involved, we're good.
Well, we are, much to my dismay, we are at the end of our time here for Authors Love Bookstores. Rebecca, Javier, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. The record books.
This is great. It's always good to see Rebecca.
Yeah, we in person on the other side, man.
Yeah.
So book lovers, if you'd like to order a book from Madison Street Books, we hope you do. You can find them online at madstreetbooks.com. And of course,
my dog is really excited about this idea.
Dog is really excited about books. And of course, to learn more about Rebecca, go visit her online at RebeccaMakkai.com. And if you're a writer, follow her on Twitter. I didn't even mention how Rebecca does daily writing prompts. So just to get you jazzed up and keep your writing going during this time. And we hope to see you next week, next Wednesday, for the next issue of Authors Love Bookstores, presented by Mighty Blaze. Until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Yeah.